Dude, it's been a month, a whole
It
month,
it has been a month.
and
Nothing really happened in the world that month, so it was fine.
nothing that, yeah, no. That's actually, so there's a couple things. I actually wanted to talk to you about this writing challenge that we're trying to do. Let's just say I'm trying to do that I've dragged you in on.
Yep, yeah.
Uh, and so, it's all kind of stemming from the 30-day sunrise challenge. I don't have enough of your
Right.
volume. There we go. I got more of your volume now. All
I
right.
can
That's
turn
not
it
on
up
you.
too.
No, I got it. I think it's over here on
Okay.
my end. I wasn't sending you back there. But which is so Darren Doan had a 30-day film challenge for filmmakers to get up every morning and go film a sunrise for 30 days and do it without failure. So if you missed a day, you had to start back over again. Now, everybody who's jumping on this challenge, I don't think I've made that part clear for them, but I'm gonna make it clear right now. So if you miss a day of writing, you have to start back over from the beginning. Uh, Adding in another day later doesn't count. Writing 2 articles in 1 day doesn't count. So every day for
Can I
30 days. Go ahead.
can I write 3 and then just release them one at a time? No, that doesn't work.
No, no, that's cheating.
No.
You can't say, "I'm gonna catch
Okay.
3 sunrises in 1 day." You can't catch 3 sunrises in 1 day.
But if the sunrise is inside me, never mind.
Okay, so you went straight Gnostic. You know better than that. Um, so you have so I think no, I think the practice I think you can write 3 things in 1 day if you have it coming out of you like that. But the goal is to create the discipline of doing the work every day for
Right.
30 days so that you create a certain type of habit. I think they have a rule that after you do something for 21 days in a row, you create a new habit, right?
Right.
Supposedly.
And so is it write one thing and put it out, or is it have to be an article?
Doesn't have to be an article. It can my rule, at least on this, just to make me right, is to have a paragraph, at least 3 sentences of a paragraph that I
Okay.
have to write. That's kind of not challenging enough though. But here's the thing. If you write 3 sentences, they need to be power packed or something like I have this line from Seth Godin I memorized. I'm gonna mess it up now. Um, your promise is connected to the change you seek to make, and it's addressed to the people you seek to change. Like that's just a basic sentence. And if you can string 3 of those together, then I think we can consider that a fair enough paragraph of like, okay, that was powerful enough that you thought about it, that you put some effort into it, and it has some girth to it. And you're like, okay, I'll
Yeah.
take that. So the rule is not to cheat yourself, that you write at least a paragraph, a thought, and get it out
All right.
every day. So 3
I'm
sentences at
in.
least.
Starting today or tomorrow?
I'm having mine out today.
Okay.
So yeah, it's technically
Well,
starts today.
I'm working on an article on uh, education and comedy. So I'll get that out today. But I'm also gonna,
Really?
yeah, because I fell down the um, Mark Twain comedy prize hole yesterday and watched a whole bunch of people talking, like Chappelle talking about Jon Stewart, and people talking about Adam Sandler at his award, what
Oh
makes them great.
yeah. Yeah, I saw that.
And the number of people that made references to either philosophers or literature, or I was like, oh man, these comedians at the very top, even the ones that do like quote unquote dumb comedy are
Yeah.
are reading deep are reading deeply. So anyway, I was starting to just think through comedy as truth telling, and why you have to study to understand to do comedy at the highest level. So
Okay.
I'm working on that one right
Uh-huh.
now, but then I'm also going to do, I pulled out some poems that I've been wanting to write imitations of. And
Well, and
so,
that's all I'm gonna be doing. Okay, you just here, I gotta read this. This is from Seth Godin. When you talked about like these comedians are really reading deeply, and you said even that like the dumb comedians, whatever, or the dumb comics or whatever, like there's really no such thing. These guys have to be pretty in depth. And Seth Godin just wrote a short blog um about this, and I just kind of wanted to to read it. Um, there's a lot of pressure to make things dumber. Better to make it dumb than to have someone simply walk away, apparently. I just got to say with Seth, like, he is my spirit animal when it comes to writing. Like, and not because I think he's like the best writer, but because I think I can imitate him because I just have to think the thoughts and figure out how to communicate them without the least amount of barriers in the way, right?
Yeah.
And so, and when it comes, I'm an editor by nature. So when it comes to editing, I feel like Seth Godin's writing is all about editing, getting the things out
Yeah.
that don't need to be there so you can see what's there clearly.
It's
And
just the precision.
Yes, and the precision of exactly. Because he doesn't use a whole bunch of big words. He's not, he doesn't even sound like an academic, but he sounds very intelligent. And so anyway, the dumbing down part is what I'm after here. So let me continue. With so much to consume and an unlimited amount to learn, there's a race to make knowledge into a checklist item. Freon gas, large language models, coefficients. I don't know what that is. Many people, I just said he doesn't use big words. Many people just want to say a magic word and move on. Of course, if we dumb things down, they become dumb. This is not the same as simplifying concepts before adding nuance. Four-year-olds easily learn to speak, and many kids in second grade can read, not because they have a dumb version, but because someone cared enough to make the method simple. So good. There are simple explanations for quantum mechanics and for auto mechanics as well. They simply take a while to understand well enough to teach anyway, and to teach them to others. Start with basic principles, go slow, and build. No need to dumb it down. Simple it up. I thought that was so good.
That's good.
Yeah, that was like simple it up. That's what I'm trying. That's what I want to do. That's what I'm trying to do. But he does this, and he kind of the reason I'm doing this 30-day challenge of writing too is because his blog does this every day. He'll drop like 2 or 3 sentences, and you're like, "Oh, that's so good. That's really good." And so I'm trying to mimic that. But
and you're putting it out on your Substack?
Yeah. So you started writing on Substack, and I'm like, is there anybody there at Substack? There's any reason to be over there? It turns out like that's where all the people who actually like to read, who like to write, and who like to engage with thought. It's not a Walmart of stuff. It's not a Walmart of videos. It's not it's actually specifically made for the writers, the nerds, So yeah, I'm gonna be writing every day on Substack, and I'm not gonna put it on any other platforms because I don't want the unnecessary audience of it's like whatever.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's interesting, you put anything long form on Twitter and you put up a 30-minute lecture or something on Twitter, and in less than 30 minutes there's an argument under there, which means they didn't have time to watch it, but they're arguing with you anyway.
No,
that doesn't happen at Substack.
Right. I've realized that. I realized they go past the title and actually read the article. But I also realized that, okay, I can get a whole lot of people on X with the right title too. So then it made me think more like Seth Godin is like, okay, if they're wanting to dumb down the content because they're not paying attention to it, then why don't I simplify it up? Why don't I try and think about ways to, if the title is that powerful, how can I use it to have them push it to somebody who will watch the whole 30 minutes or read the whole piece, So then I use those people as bait to do my dirty work. It's like, I just posted it. It's an hour long and there are 5 people who've retweeted it. Yes. All right, let's go. So part of what I wanted to ask you and talk to you about today with writing is you mentioned something to me a while ago talking about taking your verbs and press them into your subjects or do your, is that right? Did I say that right?
Yeah. So when you want to add power to your prose, you move the verb as close to the subject as possible. And then when you want to add sort of breathing room, you move them apart. Most academic works, you get that academic tone by moving the verb a long ways from the subject, and then you get that kind of, if it's done right, it's a thoughtful tone, but if it's done wrong, it's just a way of making it harder to making the point harder to work out, because by the time you get to the verb, you have to think back to the subject, right? So it adds friction to slow the thoughts of your reader down, which is usually a bad idea, because it adds friction. It's a way that academic writing sounds smart, but usually it's a way of adding kind of fog between what you're saying and the reader. So if you want to take the fog away, you press that subject and verb right close together, because then what the subject is doing is clear, and that's, for clear communication. So it's an easy way to remove friction from your writing.
Can you give me examples of that?
So if I said something like, my kids, after a really long wandering day of sunshine and green grass, slept. Right. All of that distance between the subject and the verb makes you say, well, wait, what happened? And whereas if you say, my kids slept after a long day of sunshine and grass, it's clearer, it's quicker, and it's easier to understand because there's not as much waiting around. But when people go to write, they very often put the verb at the end of the subject at the beginning, the verb at the end. And so you get a lilting, kind of lilting, slow thought process, because and then by the time you moved on to the next sentence, they're still trying to work out the last sentence.
Right.
Whereas if you're, it's just stylistically, if your verbs and subjects are close together, then there's a lot more punch and power and speed to the thought process of your reader. So they're not waiting to understand or trying to figure out what you said in one subject or in one sentence while reading the next sentence.
So move your verbs into your subjects.
Yeah, move your verbs right up into your subjects most of the time. I mean, there might be a stylistic reason that you do it the other way. It's the same with if you just extra words. We end up using a lot of extra words that we can cut out, and when you talk, you add all sorts of extra words in order to that's where the rhythm of a particular voice comes from. And so when you're writing dialogue, this is one of the things that, if you want each character to sound different, you give them different rhythms to the way they speak. And but when you're trying to write communicative prose, then all of that gets in the way.
I've heard people kind of define prose differently, or they show me prose, and I'm like, that's not how I understood it. But okay, man, this is not where I wanted to go, but I'm about to do it. You're about to do it too. I want to get 10 things over this next 30 days that you think as a writer you need to work on. One of them is moving verbs into subjects, right?
Yeah.
And then, so we're going to go through the other 9. But could you work through the idea of prose and what is a good prose?
Yeah. Well, so prose is just, it's sentences organized in paragraph form, right? So it has to do with the organization of the communication. So poetry is by line. So the sentence, is broken up by lines. And that way it adds one more layer of communication, as well as it, when it's done well, it emphasizes the musicality of the language, right? So prose
Right.
can be poetic if it is a musical feeling prose, even though it's not divided out by lines. And they work well for they do different things better than each other, right? So poetry, because there is another layer of there's basically another layer added. There's musicality added purposefully. There's a one more layer of meaning that prose doesn't have intentionally. If you read somebody like Joseph Conrad, who writes very poetic prose, then it's intentional. But most of the time, the purpose of prose is to communicate an idea, to tell a story, to get across the content. Whereas the same way as if you sing, there was a really great video of, I can't remember who it was, but he was reading Justin Bieber lyrics as an actor reading Justin Bieber lyrics as prose. And it's really funny because he was reading Baby, 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 and like it was a Shakespearean monologue. And all of a sudden you go, oh man, that's really silly as a monologue. But as a song, it works well because the music adds meaning to it as well. I was reading some of Petrarch's sonnets this morning, and you've got this very musical language, and the musicality of the language adds to the feeling that you're bringing up in your audience. Well, prose generally isn't trying to just bring up a feeling primarily. It's trying to communicate an idea, tell a story, get across information. Poetry gets across information, but there's a layer to it that is in the way of the information.
Right. Yeah.
In a good way, right? That's because you're trying to get you're trying to reproduce in the reader as a gift the feeling of the information as well as the information itself. Good prose can do that, but then we start adding adjectives to it, and we say that was very poetic prose, or that was very emotional prose, right? It adds something to it. When you're watching a movie, if the movie never makes you feel anything, then it was a failure in the movie. If you're watching a feature, if you're watching a documentary, and you never get any information, then you've failed your audience, right? Because the promise that you're making to your audience in the genre it sets the expectations, and then if you don't deliver, you just didn't serve your audience well. Well, prose, if you don't come across knowing something that you didn't know before, or receiving something information wise, you failed. Poetry, if you didn't feel something, then you failed your audience. It's part of the way you serve your audience is by understanding the purpose of what it is that you're using, the tool that you're using. So it's like I have been trying to put in a hammer, but all I had was a wrench, and you start pounding it, or put in a nail. I mean, you don't have a hammer, and so you start hitting it with the wrench, and you go, this tool is the wrong tool. Well, part of what you're doing when you're choosing prose versus poetry, or sonnet, if you're choosing a sonnet, it does certain things well. And so you're thinking, how do I serve my audience best? How do I serve my reader best? And you choose accordingly. Well, then once you do that, you have to understand how prose works in order to serve your audience well. And if your audience, this is why people that write very technical prose, like if you have excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
If you have if you're writing a booklet on how to use your your new camera, and you write it in poetry, then you've chosen improperly on because your audience wasn't in mind. You want very technical prose, very careful technical prose, step by step how to prose. But the older authors understood this stuff and wrote about it and were careful, and newer authors and experienced authors, this is often the difference between a pro and an amateur. And the amateur has their style that they like to write in. A pro chooses style based on what's going to serve the audience best. I don't know. Does that help? Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. I'm trying to think of, so then how do you develop good prose? Or how do you know if you need to, I guess if you kind of know what you need to write poetry or whatever, but how do you start developing good prose then? Because it's not something that I think even we're not usually taught to even craft.
Right. Well, there's actually there are style guides out there. I mean, there's style guides. Like if you're writing for the New York Times, there's a style guide for the New York Times. This is the kind of prose we want. But there's a really good book. It's just called Style, I think, or Writing with Style, that goes through all the different styles of prose and how they work. And then, but the best thing to do.
This is stuff that like writers know about, isn't it? All you writers know about all this stuff. If you're not writing, you're just like, I made a sentence. I don't have misspelled words. My grammar is correct. I communicated a thought. Yes. But you writers that are all in, you're like, oh, here you go. It's like, yeah.
I mean, that's the thing, is like one of the big difference when you get to pro, people that are professionals, they have read books and books on the craft of writing, right? They treat it like a craft. The same way, you see somebody that has built 1,000 bookshelves, and people pay them to come in and install bookshelves in their house, and they look at and they say, I know exactly how to fit a bookshelf into this space. That's different than the guy who says, well, I'm going to go just buy some bookshelves at Target and put them on the wall. I know how to put those together. A lot of people that are amateurs, and that serves them well, that's what they do, is they put together the Target bookshelves, and they lean against the wall and everything's good. But you don't become a pro at writing that way. There's nothing that you get good at that way. Actually, I just read a really great book called So Good They Can't Ignore You.
Yes, I think about that book because
it's phenomenal. But the whole middle section is on improving your craft and the different methods that you can employ to improve whatever craft it is. And he uses some studio guitar, a studio guitar player, the things that he does to improve as a guitar player. Right? So you have to be writing, and then you go back and you edit everything. There's nothing that I put out anymore that doesn't go through multiple edits. I'll re-edit a Twitter post multiple times before I post it now, because I know that that's what it takes to be consistently good. Emails, I write them, then I edit my emails before I send them. Because I want to be always improving my craft. And as a writer, there was a time when I was putting stuff, when I was writing, when I first started writing plays, and I got some feedback that all your characters sound like you. I was like, oh. So I started reading on how to write better dialogue, practicing writing better dialogues, trying to write I used to pick people at church and then try to write dialogue in their voice.
Yeah.
This is how does this person talk? And so the big breakthrough came at that point. And then I got brought in a number of times just as doing dialogue punch up, because when I started sending my scripts around, people started commenting on the dialogue. Oh, that dialogue's really good. And the goal was to get to the point where I could write dialogue, a whole page of dialogue where at the top, you tell everybody who the two characters are, and then they can read it and you never have to tell them again who's speaking.
Yes.
Right? So that the dialogue each character has a distinct enough voice that the dialogue, that you begin hearing it in different, your reader hears it in different voices. So this is where Kevin Smith, who I love as a director, is as a writer, this is his biggest problem. Right? All of his characters sound just like him in an interview, but so every character is a puppet on his hand. And so the other thing that I like to do is go in and fix things. How would I have fixed that? How would it go? So go in and edit other people's stuff and fix it. Not because anybody's ever going to see those things, but because you're trying to build your craft and your skill. Before you ever build anybody else a house, you've got to have built a whole bunch of houses. So just thinking of it like a craftsman. What a good friend of mine in high school, he graduated, and within a couple of years he was managing a large software firm, or a networking firm. And I was talking to him, about, man, that was quick. You must be really talented. And he was like, well, and he opened up his backpack and he said, I also am always reading these books on networking. And he's carrying around books on networking to read in his spare time because he wants to be the best at it. And he's at 21 years old. He was already one of the best at it. So he had committed to the craft. And I was like, yeah, there's nothing in my life that I do like that. And it was really convicting. I was 21, 22 years old, and it changed my mindset on, if you're going to be good at something, you got to be working at it as an art, as a craft.
So number one is move verbs into subjects. Number two, oh man, I got to come up with 10 right now. Okay. However many you think you can get out of the bag.
Yeah. I mean,
if you don't do that, we're talking about the election, just so you know.
Okay. I think the next thing is can you say it in fewer words? Right? Is to take your sentences, to take each sentence and say, okay, is there a way to say this in fewer words? Are any of these words unnecessary? Because if you put together an idea in 16 words, but you can say it in 8 words, you've doubled the power of every word. Right. So each word is twice as powerful because the same content is being delivered now and this is something I learned from Jerry Seinfeld. Right. He's the master at this, where he'll take a joke that's 12 words long and work it until it's 8 words long, work it until it's 7 words long. And then the next thing you know, you've got incredible pithiness. But it's just more powerful, right? Because a joke told in 15 words is not as funny as a joke told in 7. It's just, as long as it's still clear, right? So can you clearly state it in fewer words? And sometimes that means, taking out, if you've got a verb, but it takes 2 adjectives to give that verb power, then you've got to find a verb that contains those adjectives in the meaning. Right. So that, I guess that'd be my third thing, is improve your verb vocabulary, so that you don't need adjectives or adverbs. I guess you'd say you don't need adverbs. And then if you can improve your nouns so that you don't need adjectives, then you've improved. So now we've got 4. So move your verb.
So improve
Yeah.
verb vocabularies, improve noun vocabulary.
And yeah, so that if you need adverbs to communicate what that with that verb, then find a better verb. If you need adjectives to communicate with that noun, find a better noun so that you can, take the adjectives and the adverbs away. Sometimes you can't, and you need the adjectives. PG Woodhouse is really great with this. Sometimes you get it down to the fewest number of words, and you realize, oh, I've lost something in the rhythm, or I've lost something in the, so you have to add it back in. But you now know you need that word, right? You need that word,
right?
Because you've gotten it down to fewer words and it doesn't work anymore. So you've got to add that word back in.
That's what I think I love about Seth too, is like Godin gets it just to he can do it in 4 words.
Right. And that's a hugely important process or principle, maybe, because if it takes a lot of words to say something, usually that means you don't know it as well, right? You don't know what you're talking about as well. It doesn't always, because some people are just wordy and they know a lot, but so that's
well, that just means that too they don't know how to communicate it well, right? It's
right, yeah, because the communication is a different skill than the knowing,
the knowledge of exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're at 4.
We're at 4. What's another one?
5 technically now.
We're at 5. Okay.
Yeah.
I think your vocabulary is the limit of your communication. And so if you're not working to expand your vocabulary, then you're not working to expand your ability to communicate and, I think, take dominion over ideas. And so the limit of your vocabulary, I think, is the limit of your power to take dominion. So, I mean, I like dictionaries, and like very specific dictionaries are really fun. Let's see what else.
Part of the reason why while you're thinking about some of these other ones, let me just take a pause here. So you're at 5, which is basically expand your vocabulary, because that's the limit of your ability to be able to reach people, right? Part of the reason why I'm taking this challenge is because I realize, since this weird coalition, this right coalition of people have come, I realize that we're going to have to spend a lot of time teaching, educating, and being winsome to people who, through the natural law, have come to reject the left ideology. Right. So I like to think of it like the yuck factor that is built into creation has kicked inside of a lot of common people that are not Christians, but refuse to go that direction. Which, by the way, I just want to say, as bad as Sodom and Gomorrah was, I don't think they had that. Right. I know we're bad in America. I know we got some bad things going on. I'm not trying to make any excuses for us, but you have to look at this last election and what happened and be like, oh, the Imago Dei is still beaming through a lot of the muck, so that people are saying not that direction. And they're turning from that and looking and saying, so Christians, what do you have? Or remember when things were better? It seemed like we had a stronger Christian base, whatever that is, I don't know. But you got atheists saying, I'm a cultural Christian and I like cultural Christianity. I mean, you even had not Richard Dawkins, what's his name that debated Doug Wilson? Christopher Hitchens. You had Hitchens saying, if I could remove every speck of Christendom, I wouldn't do it.
Right.
And so there's this, we have this, I wrote a little bit about this, but we kind of we forget that we have reality on our side, that we actually have the Imago Dei on our side, that people, at least that have had such a Christian saturation in America, their yuck factor is still in place. And we're going to have to spend the next 2 years and the next 4 years and the next 15 years, the next 20 years showing people why that's yuck to them, and then telling and showing them what beauty is now, and
Right.
doing it in such a way that's not, we have to, I hate this word. I wish I had a better word. We have to learn how to convince both their eyes, their minds, and their hearts. That's another way
Yeah.
of saying being winsome, right? Like, I just hate that word winsome because it's been horribly used. People use winsome as a way to get out of actually trying to convince somebody about an objective standard. That's why I don't like that term.
Yeah. Well, often they use winsome as they say winsome, but what they mean is give up the argument.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. Yes.
They say you've got to be winsome and that what I mean by that is stop trying to convince people.
Yes.
Just lose.
Yes. Yeah.
Like,
and
winsomeness is just losing. I don't understand that.
No, not at all. I'm not convinced about that at all. But and so I'm trying to get my tools as sharp as I possibly can, not to necessarily I want to argue with people differently. I want to argue with them at the level of observation, right? Because I'm realizing that, okay, I want to use what it seems like God is using. God is using this yuck factor to make them kind of back off of this ledge a little bit. I want to continue to use that yuck factor and slowly pull them by their inherent imago Dei. You know what I mean? I want to pull them by that in the same way that we pull Christians by their baptism. I want to pull these guys by the image that God has placed on them and call them into repentance to be consistent with that image God has placed on them. And the best way to do that is through the word of God. But I want to show them like the reason you feel like this, the way that you feel like this is because God has made you to have these type of desires. Why is it wrong for children to have to go through this, as you're getting your camera back up?
I have no idea what happened. My camera just.
I don't think the Prince Power of the Airways liked what I was saying, and it just was like taking you out. Yeah, it's really giving you a moment, but that's okay.
It is. It's okay. I'll figure it out. But I do think that's one of the, when we don't really study rhetoric, like and so we don't understand how to be convincing.
Yes.
And it's a gift to be convincing when you have something good, true, beautiful to say.
Yes. Well, and I realized I was talking. I'm realizing that you were on the live election night show, and we were talking about abortion. I agree wholeheartedly with Rod Martin. I agree with the abolitionist, and there's just kind of this one side or the other kind of conversation. But I don't think that it takes into consideration reality.
Right.
I do you know how many arguments I had to have with people before I came to a position, and how patient people had to be with me so that I could learn the right position, and how many things that I did wrong as I was going that way, that I'm so grateful to God that somebody was patient enough to work with me. And it usually wasn't the person who was yelling at me and cursing me out.
Right.
But it also wasn't the person who refused to challenge me. Like, they challenged me, and they did it in such a way where they kept the dialogue going over and over and over again, to the point that I'm having to come to terms with my own thinking. I'm having to come to terms with how I act. And we have not, you think about how good and effective the other side has been at communicating the value of abortion in the culture and society. And we haven't done a great job of communicating the value of human life in society. Period. We've we've become Gnostic. We've separated human life and heaven. We've separated the beauty of heaven coming to earth. We've not done a great job of talking about the incarnation. You know, it's just there's so many areas that we've failed at. It sounds like you beating something down over there.
Man, I have no idea what happened to my camera. It just
said
died.
no. Anyway, as long as you're there in audio, the podcast will be fine, I guess. But we've separated from heaven from earth, right? Instead of asking heaven to come to earth.
I think that's why our rhetoric also suffers, because I was thinking, you know, I kept trying to get a word in that part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that that the left has done really well is they have, when they want to move a particular direction, they would never condemn the radicals in that direction. Right. So they might admit, oh yeah, that's too far. Like the people spiking trees, that's too far. We don't think that's a good idea, but the principle is right. You know, they want us to take better care of the environment, you know, or whatever. And it moved the Overton window.
Mm-hmm.
But we're really quick to condemn the radicals on our side because we think that we don't actually understand how arguments and rhetoric work, because the underlying assumptions are what is that's what's in play, or that's where the argument is. Aristotle calls it the enthymeme, the assumed premise that is unstated. We don't understand, or maybe we haven't thought deeply, or we don't realize what assumed premises are shared and what ones are not. And that's where the argument really actually is in the enthymeme, in that assumed premise. And you know, Aristotle says if you want to be effective, make sure you're sharing the assumed premise. If not, you've got to back up and make an argument for the premise that you're assuming, the unstated premise. But in cultural types of issues, the unstated premise is embodied by the radicals. And so, you know, when I see you know, the brothers and sisters that are, you know, I will make no concessions on this, you know, they're the ones that are actually doing the work to change the unstated premise, broadly speaking. And what we need to do is say, I fully agree in principle. We're on the same side. We're trying to accomplish the same thing. I'm trying to accomplish that over here. And I totally get what you're saying. Keep on, brother. You know, that sort of thing. Let's have a conversation about tactics, not and rather than what we often do, which is try to distance ourselves from folks, and we start dividing up the conservative party or the conservative movement. That's not rhetorically effective. And I think that I can't remember the first name of the guy that talked about the Overton window, but I think he is just talking about something that I think is observable, that the unstated assumptions are where the argument really is. And the Overton window is what measures the unstated assumptions of a culture. We have to be trying to win those unstated assumptions, but you don't win them in kind of a direct argument route. Though you win by showing the beauty of things, by by telling the stories that don't fit in that window, that sort of thing. So
right. That makes you want to look right past it and be like, what's on the other side of this? What's going on over there? Yeah,
right.
that's real. I've that's the whole purpose for me wanting to do this exercise, is to try and figure out, we have such great treasures in scripture and in God's world, and I don't think we use half the bag that we have. Well, I know I haven't been writing. I haven't been trying to communicate. I haven't written a book. I communicate constantly on a podcast, but I haven't tried to put into thoughts how important it is for Christians to communicate to each other and to communicate to the world and try to be winsome through literature, which is, by the way, the number one way that we have all been educated. Now, I think it's changing a little bit, but I mean, it's kind of important to start learning how to write in a winsome way, so that people say, I've never thought about it like that. I haven't seen the world that type of way. And just to be honest, word works so differently than just normal dialogue or podcasting. It still is a unique thing at writing.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a full, trilogy on something. You don't have to be C.S. Lewis, but I think all communicators have a responsibility to write. And especially right now, because people are going to be reading it. I think these guys, as there are the RFKs and the Joe Rogans and the Elon Musks, there's a bunch of people behind them that we've got to reach, and reach with an objective biblical standard of how to think. And we need to show that is the only way that is reasonable, right? That is the only way that we have fruitfulness, because their yuck factor is not just saying what I don't like. It's saying that I know that I should be liking something, but that ain't it. Right. Like that's a rejection of secularism. But I don't want them to find the secularism light either.
Or the secularism,
or evangelical secularism.
Yeah. And that's, I do think that we have not consistently been doing the work of rooting out the secularism, the secularism in our own hearts, the secularism on our own side. And because it's still completely invisible to us. That's the I mean, I'm prepping. I think I'll be able to turn it into a book, but just a history of this, of the secular metaphysic, starting with Machiavelli and working up through critical theory, of actually just what did it take? What kind of things had to shift to get from a medieval understanding of, where there's no secularism, there's secular spaces or civic spaces, but there's no secularism, to get from that to where does the church fit in a secular order, where the order itself is secular.
Right. And now we got to fit the church in there.
And
somehow.
We got to fit the church into it somehow. That's so different that's such a different set of assumptions, that the question is, how do we get from here to there? It was mostly through novelists. I mean, the most powerful people were novelists and writers, and they weren't professional philosophers that were going around shifting and changing the world. It was novelists and poets and historians, storytellers, because we've been in a storytelling war since the Garden of Eden. The devil came with a different story to interpret the facts of the Garden of Eden.
I was at a symposium this weekend on natural law. It was really good. I think it was natural law versus more of Antillean Vietnam. I mean, they didn't say it like that, but it was a really good symposium. It was put on by the Hill Institute. I enjoyed every bit of it. And I found some common ground with guys who are natural law guys. I think there's way more unity around the ones who are, I don't know what you would call it, the old school original natural law guys who find their natural law in Calvin. And I realized that we probably aren't very different at all in a lot of ways.
Right.
So I like those guys, but there's the other natural law guys. I don't even know what there was one of the guys said there as he was defining natural law, another natural law guy said, don't find any of that familiar whatsoever.
So even within the natural law guys.
Yeah, it was so good. So I realized, I'm like, okay, me and you, we're going to be all right. But one of them was talking about, he just had a comment he threw away, and it wasn't a natural law guy, but he just said, the way that people's imaginations are formed isn't necessarily by academic articulation or academic rigor. It's through stories. And he uses some huge, important person. I can't remember, he was like a leader of a nation or something. And he's writing a book, and the guy who he's talking about chose to use C.S. Lewis and not Van Til or Calvin. And he's like, the reason for that is because of how well the C.S. Lewis's style of communicating worked, right? It was effective, and even he thought it was. And even though C.S. Lewis is extremely academic and intelligent, his writing, and not just his stories, but his writing is still story enriched. It's strong diagnosis of culture through a Christian lens, and no matter what you're reading him, you still feel like he's bringing you into this reality that you didn't know had a door to enter through, and so that kind of thing, the C.S. Lewis type of writing, the Chesterton type of writing, the jovial attitude, that kind of thing is going to be so necessary right now. And I think that's the whole reason I'm doing the challenge, is to try and develop. This is why I called what I'm doing called diagnostic doxology, hopefully to diagnose things and see things so well that you break out into praise, right? Like that's the whole goal. How can I spend enough time observing something that God has made, since it all's come from him, and find the metaphysical realities inside of that thing and burst out into praise because of it? And that's happened. The reason I'm doing that now is because of the conversation that you and I have been having, Jason.
Well, I do think that is that's the true winsomeness is, a lot of people, we have actually replaced rhetoric with marketing, and we
that's so real. Yes. Oh, you got to separate those two. Okay. What's the difference? What is rhetoric? What is marketing? And why have we replaced it? That's good.
Well, I think it's because, I think it's because we have come to think of ourselves as products. I don't think very many people would say it out loud, but that was Karl Marx's kind of central definition of mankind, was that they're all consumers and producers, that they are economic units, that they are, and the number of times I've heard people, good, solid, conservative people, so to speak, somebody comes in and says, "Oh, look, you've got Asians. They do this, but they end up with a higher education, and they divide the world up by race and say, and we've got to fix the system." And conservatives respond, "No, this is an issue of who has money and who doesn't have money." You go, "What? we're going to replace one form of Marx. We're going to replace traditional Marxism now with race Marxism. Like,
Yeah.
this is, where people are treated as economic units, economic strata, and that's where the real rivalry is. But marketing is what you do with products, and a lot of people have come to think of themselves as a brand or as a product, or and they think of it, they act that way rather than thinking of each other as humans. And rhetoric is the art of persuading humans. If you're dealing with economic units, you don't persuade them like humans. You persuade them the way you convince somebody to buy your candy bar versus somebody else's candy bar, Sprite versus Coke sort of situation. But
Wait, can I push back on that just a little bit? Because I actually agree with you. I think you're absolutely right. I'm not questioning your analysis. I think that's dead on. But I am questioning if you cannot have both brand, because I don't like the idea of product. I don't think we're product. Though I also want to, because I work in this environment, the brand and rhetoric don't have to be at odds.
Correct. Right.
Because I think there is a brand that flows out of every individual, because I'm thinking of their makeup, but it's not a product. Does that make sense?
Yes, though.
So let me break it down, man, before
Okay.
you completely, and I want you to come at me and completely annihilate me on this. I'm totally fine with that, because I want to work through this thought. But so I think when I think about brand, I'm thinking about the idea of, you look at Nike, they have a brand, or should I say Michael Jordan has a brand, right? And if Michael Jordan was going to make a hotel, you could be like, I know what kind of hotel it's going to be. Trump, he has a brand.
Right.
Right. But he's back, ladies and
Fixed
gentlemen. Okay. And so, yeah, so there's brands that, but the product is the hotel. If I asked what Hilton was going to make as far as a tennis shoe, you wouldn't have any concept for that, because they're not a brand, right? They're just a name on a building with a symbol. They're not a brand. Where I think Rush Dooney his whole name carries a certain imagery with it. It's a brand. C.S. Lewis, there's a brand that's there. That's not necessarily a product, but it flows out of what that person does, and it creates a culture that if I said, hey, I'm going to invite you to a C.S. Lewis theme park, you already know what to expect, right? Like you have an idea there, because that's what follows the brand. And so I think there is a brand that's kind of baked into individuals by what they do. I know Sharon's brand is. Sharon's got a brand, right? Like, she's her tone, her attitude, her whole thing. If she was gonna make a space, I know what that's gonna be, because of her personality that's in it. And maybe that's what I mean by brand, is this is your personality. And so that might be part of the thing, is the definition of what a brand is. So when I think about brand, it's like, I'm thinking about the promise that comes with the thing, right? The person,
Right.
What is the promise that comes with them?
I think if you mean that metaphorically,
not metaphysically.
then, yeah.
Well,
right.
no, that's not what I'm trying to do. You're a brand. Well, what does brand do? Brand is a man, is a woman. What is it? No, I'm not meaning it like that.
Yeah, but how do you measure the successfulness of a brand?
By how well it fulfills its promise.
If a brand is successful, it fulfills its promise but never makes any sales, is it a successful brand or an unsuccessful brand?
If water is not wet when you touch it, is it water?
Right. So
I'm saying
you
that's
measure.
inescapable. I'm saying it's inescapable. I'm saying you can't not do it.
Is a person's do you measure a person's success in the same sort of way?
Depends. Yeah, I could.
So if a person's success is measured by how much money they brought in,
No, by the covenant that they decided to make and keep.
well, but if a brand, if you really successfully brand something but you never make any sales,
I don't think that's possible.
right? It's not possible, but it's they go hand in hand, right? Whereas if a
Right.
person successfully brands themselves, then the measure of success would have to be income.
No, I don't think so. Value.
Exchange, maybe exchange of value.
Yeah.
So, but you would have to measure the value added in a different way than you measure the value added in a brand.
I don't think so.
Well, you measure the value added in a brand by money exchanged, right?
Not necessarily.
Well, if you're really good at branding, but your branding never brings any money, then you're actually not really good at branding, because that's the purpose of
Well, I think
branding.
well, it depends on what the brand is, who the brand is to, and what it's for. So not all brands participate in a free market necessarily. Some brands participate just in relational
But that's
without
what I'm saying
necessarily.
is you've now metaphorically expanded the definition of brand
Yeah.
beyond its literal definition. Right?
Right.
The literal definition of branding is I successfully branded to achieve sales.
Yeah. See, I'm not considering it as a part of a sales or maybe a
Sales funnel.
or business. And I think
Right.
I could merge it into out in business, but I think I'm expanding it past that. Yes, I am expanding it past a context.
Which is a valid way of thinking and doing things, but it's the same sort of metaphor system. You're taking a metaphor system from a literal from its literal home, and then using
Applying
it in
it
its
everywhere.
non-literal home, right? So which we do this sort of thing all the time. The question then just becomes what other baggage does it bring with it that we're not aware of, so that we can resist it, right? So this is, when Newton called the created order the divine machine, right? That God created this machine. He didn't mean it in the way it ended up being used, but the metaphor system brought with it mechanistic view that ended, that ended up through Kant, who wrote the first popularization of Newton's mechanistic universe. He wrote the first popularization of it.
But just,
and then, so it's, as a metaphor system, it's helpful in some ways, but it has embedded within it certain assumptions about nature, and that I think as long as we're aware of them, then we can use those sorts of metaphors, knowing, it's a metaphor system.
I think that's I think that's a good warning. At the same time, I'm wondering, how could that not be a reality about everything? Like, because I think
it is.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the same sort of how the woke crowd has taken and then applied those systems to Scripture, and then has completely gutted out the reality of Scripture. But that's not what Scripture meant by how they use it. Well, you get eisegesis now, right? Okay, that's not what the intent of the way the term was being used is to be used. You're manipulating it from another perspective.
Imagine if I came in and said, I'm going to write a book called Branding Jesus Style, and go explain all of the branding principles from the Gospels.
Yeah.
Would that make you uncomfortable?
It's just the idea you put Jesus' name in anything makes me uncomfortable. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, it's like,
right.
Yeah. Music Jesus' way. Like, whoa, bro, like, chill out. Like, it just, because there's a certain reality to that I don't know if everybody's going to grasp or whatever. I seen people
Yeah.
mess that up, but
Right.
I wouldn't have a problem with it if Rush Jr. wrote it
But so
or Lewis
so here's
or
an
Doug
example.
or
So
you.
so if I said hey oh man, what would be a good example of this? So
Well,
there's
wait. So how about this? What if I said God has a brand?
right. Does that make you uncomfortable at all?
No, because all I hear is covenant.
Right. So, but that's what I'm saying is I don't think that's what most people hear when you
Right.
talk branding. Right. So,
Well, that's because I think when people are talking branding, most of them are talking about, like you just talked about earlier, which is marketing versus the idea of brand. I don't even think the idea of brand really is inside of people's head, which is really your promise. Like you, right? Like that's when I think about what brand is. It is what your promise to someone else is.
but if let's say I, if I tried to say, well, here, what's my brand, right? What's Jason Farley's brand?
You don't want to go there.
No, I don't. That's true. Cause I immediately start feeling all punk rock and want to oi, 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 and start burning things down.
Right. That's there you go. You just labeled your brand.
Right. But the reason that I would be doing that is because I wanted to, sell more books, or I wanted to expand, in my influence, or whatever it is that I
can I help you frame that? Just maybe.
Yeah.
You wanted to serve the smallest viable audience you could. How about that?
Right. Well, but I think that isn't the normal way people think about branding. So
okay,
if branding were to shift and to that, right, if it were to basically expand beyond what is right now, I think the literal meaning of the word branding, right? You hire a branding officer or a branding company to come in and develop a brand for your marketing campaign, right? That's I think that's probably still the literal meaning of the term.
That's such an old covenant thing. Yeah.
I completely agree that that it's ineffective and it's not the way you do things anymore. But that's because I think people interact with brands differently than they used to. Right. Because that's a shift. That's a cultural shift that's still isn't even broad across the generations.
Fair.
Right? Younger people, they go and they watch live streams on Twitch and pay people Twitch bits, and boomers don't. Right? So they interact with quote unquote their brands differently, but they want human shaped brands. And the older generations, they wanted an expensive purse to put on display my social credit, my social value.
Right.
That's what they bought things for different reasons. As that shifts and changes, part of the reason it shifts and changes is because of the dislodgement. People are looking for some way to grab onto something that makes them feel attached to reality, and they're willing to pay for that. Whereas the covenant is, you who have no money, come and buy. You who have no food, come and eat. Right? It's a different sort of exchange rate. And so to start talking about branding the church, for example, I think I think the metaphor system that you're bringing in is going to change the nature of the way you think about the church. Right? Now, the newer branding might not be the same, but I do think that the baggage of the metaphor system brings with it a shift and a change.
Well, there's no doubt. That's why you had to have the book of Hebrews. I'm just saying. I'm on to something. I'm just saying. Yes, we had people were still bringing in doves and all sorts of animals to try and figure out where they sacrifice them at for their sins. And they had to be known that's not how we do that anymore. Right?
Right.
Like,
And it wasn't just the Jews that had this, that had to
right.
work through this stuff too, because there's a great letter from Gregory to Augustine of Canterbury, where Augustine writes for advice. He says, they keep showing up with animals to sacrifice for church. Right. What do I do? And Gregory gives very pastoral advice about how to walk people from a religious system of fear where the God, you got to keep the God happy or he will get you, to a religious system where you come to church to serve the Lord and be served. Right. It's a completely different mindset where the Lord, the worship service is not a one direction service. God also serves us in the process, and God gives more to us than we give to him. So he talks about when they come, turn it into a barbecue, a potluck, so that they can see that God gives to them and not just takes from them.
Yeah.
Right. It's a pastoral way of bringing people from an old set of assumptions about the divine to a new set of assumptions about the divine. And I do think we need to be thinking like that.
I'm still very uncomfortable about using the idea of branding the church. It is not, because I think it already has its identity. It doesn't need to be branded. It already is a thing. It's its own thing. And so I think everybody is like that in one sense too. But there is a if someone called me to work on church branding, only thing I would do was make sure that they had their catechisms and Bibles and what is that makes them who they are, that God has given them to be who they are. And I would say, make sure you have that lockstep and internally communicate it very well, and then begin to display that reality everywhere. So it wouldn't be, right. I think that, and this is the thing about what we talk about with branding hasn't really been defined that way. It's usually trying to get it's kind of actually what happened to the church with the seeker sensitive movement.
Yep.
That's actually what happened with the seeker sensitive movement. They branded themselves, but they branded themselves outside of who they were, who God made them to be. And so for me, when I'm thinking about branding too, I'm thinking about the idea that it is authentically communicating the metaphysical realities of who you are.
I think that's what branding should be.
Right.
I don't, where you say, here is the way that we will add value, that our product adds value to your life. And then if you love your neighbor, you find the people that will you use marketing to find the people whose lives will be improved by what you're bringing, by what you're selling. And then they give you money to communicate that in a way that communicates, you've added value to my life, I would like to add value to yours, right? That gift economy of exchange of value is the heartbeat of capitalism and what makes a Christian, I think.
Yeah.
But the church is not a capitalist institution in that way.
Right.
Exactly. And this is why we talk a lot about the way vows of celibacy affected the world, and it in bad ways and in good ways. And as Protestants, we tend to just mock vows of celibacy, but we don't understand that the church, the vows of celibacy, communicated to a world obsessed with sexuality as a religious experience that saved you from being disconnected from reality, that sexuality and sex was the way you reconnected to reality in the ancient world, right? It's a part of the Gnostic tradition, that sex was actually the way it was a divine experience. Well, the church, through vows of celibacy, proved them wrong, right? We actually connect to the divine and celibate people do just as well as anybody else, right? And that cleansed the
Hmm.
minds of the West. Um, now, what we don't actually talk about or haven't thought a lot about is the way the vows of poverty did the same to a world obsessed or that of a world that thought about money wrong, right?
It's like
Vows
a
of poverty,
fast.
yeah, it was a 500-year fast that where the church showed the world that it is not at base just an economic it's not at base just a money exchange. That's that value the value of money is not a direct correlation to the value of reality, right? And I think we're back in that situation
Hmm.
because Marxism is a return to that old mentality where power and money are um, are metaphysical realities that define the actual value of things. So that's why
Hmm.
Marx could say that a prostitute is more valuable than a housewife because a housewife doesn't have an income. Um, that value and money are metaphysically tied in by Karl Marx. Well, that used to be the belief system, right? That you could buy citizenship in the Roman Empire because citizenship was a social value that was purchasable by cash, right? Well, the church in the West um, dislodged that thought process through vows of poverty. The church this is why the church is automatically a nonprofit just by its existence, is because in the West we understand that you need non-economic institutions to remind us that the world is not defined the value of things in the world is not defined by money, right? That there's that's one way, that's one value, but it's not the only value. So
That's good.
um I think that as people think of themselves as simply brands, um then you are going to get, I think, more and more of that problem, the same kinds of problems you had before.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. That's actually that's my fear when I see the TikTok culture, when I see the social media culture, is that there is a simply brand at mentality put on people that is like, no, 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 that's because I think it'll do the same thing that kind of we have the yuck factor in right now with the trans movement, which is it will remove the sex, it will remove masculinity, femininity, remove covenant realities if you're simply that, because
Right.
that's not who you are, right. um and so that's why when I say I think of brands, I think of them as the promise you make to
Right.
something, right. um and so I think in one sense there is something that's in there that we all have. I think that's what kind of social media picks up on with influencers, is that reality,
Right.
and they're touching it, and that's what we all appreciate about individuals. When we watch a person who's doing a show, we're not so interested in all the things that they say per se. It's that there's something that comes along with them that we like. There's a whole,
Right.
and that's what I'm. And that there's a, you know, when a woman submits, the promise that she gets safety along with all that, right? That's part of all of, there's a whole package that comes with that promise. Oh, I like that package that comes with that promise. Okay, I'll be writing about that one. You still got 6 more things. You got 4 more things to lay out that writers need.
4 more things to lay out.
I've given you plenty of time I've given you about 40
Yeah.
minutes to figure out what to.
No, you absolutely have. Well, I think understanding your audience's assumptions um, is really important because so um, I just watched the new Venom movie. The third one, it didn't unfortunately deliver on the promises of a trilogy. The second one was really good, but the third one, it wasn't terrible, but it wasn't
What
great.
was the third one?
The new Venom, it's in the theaters right now.
Oh, it has. I didn't even know they had a third one. The second one was so like, that I was like,
I loved the second one. I really liked the second one. The first one was but I really like the second one. But it's the middle of a trilogy, and that's usually the one I love the most. Is that the middle? I love that. I love the tragic aspects of a middle of a good trilogy. But the third one is a bummer. But it made me think about what the second one had such good writing, and it was very subtle. But one of the things that they did was they brought Venom into a church, so that he had to sacrifice himself, and they kept using the kind of the Christian imagery of Christ figure, self-sacrificing Christ figure of Venom, and he had to embrace that about himself. So to move from I'm powerful enough to eat things to I'm not powerful enough to overcome this enemy unless I take him into myself and die. Right. So very Christian understanding, but by moving it into a church, they knew that in that Western people have imagery to communicate that, so you don't have to say it out loud. So you can stab a character between the ribs and stab him in the hands and communicate through that image that somebody is a Christ figure, ironically or unironically, right? You can be going up God's thumb in the movie Holes, and the character can stab himself in the hands, and now he's bleeding from the hands, and he dies, and he has to be carried while bleeding from the hands, and that's a Christ image, right? He's sacrificing himself. You can do that sort of thing, and they did that sort of thing at the end of the new Venom, where he takes one between the ribs as he dies, right? So they're still aware of it, but by moving it into a new setting, you actually lost some of the power of it. If you have an image that you want to use that's not a shared image, you have to build the value of that image. So something like Searching for Bobby Fischer, where they take the main character's desire to be great, and they end up externalizing it onto a piece of paper that is here's evidence that people think you're great, because here's this piece of paper that from all of the people you want their respect, here is a piece of paper that says they respect you. They build and externalize the visualization of his desire with this piece of paper, so that they can get to that scene towards the end of Searching for Bobby Fischer, where that piece of paper is not there isn't just one of them, or he thinks there's just one of them, and he's after it, and then the guy pulls out a whole stack of them, and he is able to say, what you desire is not as valuable as you think. And it's not just the piece of paper, but the actual desire you have is wrong. They had to build that image. They had to build that symbolic communication, because it's not a shared symbolic communication. Whereas being stabbed in the ribs, being stabbed in the hands, you're being lifted up with your arms out. Those are all images that we all already share. So when you have to care enough about your audience to learn what they already assume. And if they don't already assume something that you assume, you have to spend time building that assumption in your readers. And that's where that's why a lot of writers end up simply only writing for their own tribe because they don't care about people enough to back up to the level of things we don't share in common at the assumption level and begin the work of communicating there.
Mm-hmm. All right. That's good. I like that. Number 7.
Number 7. Um, you learn to write by imitating. Thomas Jefferson used to, I think it was Thomas Jefferson, he used to take his favorite writers, and he would take a page and he would cut out the words and jumble them all up and then see if he could reassemble it. Because he wanted to get to that level of being able to imitate his favorite writers. That I could, if I know what words they are, what words I have, I can build what he wrote out of those words because I know him that deeply. So, I've got my favorite screenplays, High Noon, Baby Driver, Princess Bride. I have read them multiple times and made notes. How did they do what they're doing here? So that if I want to be able to write screenplays that good, you have to analyze how they did that. So I've got my favorite poets. I write poetry imitations. I break down Gerard Manley Hopkins to the level of why this word, how does this word relate to that word? Why does he repeat this word? And Malcolm Guite, the same thing, where you really dig in and break down at the granular level how your favorite writers do things. If you want to get good, you have to understand what makes the writing you love good. I've gone through, my favorite, some of my favorite movies and done scene by scene outlines.
I've done that for editing. Yeah. I actually have a wall. I used to have a wall in the studio that I had with all the compositions of my favorite DPs or directors. And I would have a wall that had all their shots up there, and I would look at them every day, say, why is that shot so good?
Yeah. I've got your master shots, volume 1, 2, and 3, and I've read through them multiple times because I want to.
Is that where that is? I didn't know where that was.
But I've gone through them multiple times because I want to direct someday. That's where my weakness is. Personally, I'm good on the word side. I'm good on the story side, but I know that I wouldn't be able to direct shots at the level that I would like to. And so I've gone through those books a couple of times. I've just finished a really good book. Well, I just went through a really good book on the compositions of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Man.
That's one I need to update. That was, of course, so comic book stuff is so different.
Yeah.
But that's why Matrix was so good. Matrix was so good because it was a comic book come to life.
Right.
So anyway,
that's why I still read comic books is because the visual storytelling. I know it's going to help my writing, just to see what they can do with an image and very little writing, and then how do you write in a comic book feeling way.
I have to do that. All right, so that's number 7. Number 8. I like number 7. I got a star next to that one.
Well, I think number 8 is like you've got to be filling the well that you're drawing from, and so that's it's reading, that is watching and life, paying attention, reading outside of your whatever what you are trying to write in. If this is why I'll just get books or do like deep dives in a particular subject area that is not something I'm writing on or whatever, but just, trying to get a broad set of information in your head so that, when it comes time, when you need to solve a problem or something, you think, well, oh, I've got, this problem. Maybe Caesar had this problem in war. And I know I'm over here talking about marketing or trying to develop a marketing plan or write a drip campaign or something. And I'm running into this problem, but over here, Caesar ran into this problem in war, and solved it this way. Learn to think broader and analogously, between subjects. I don't know if is that writing advice.
No, I think so. I think of it as being copious, so
Yeah.
That's one of the things that makes you write well on one topic and very articulately on one topic is that you know how it all ties to the rest. So I can write really well on the heart because I know what it does to the feet, and I know what it does to the head, and I know what it does to the stomach, and I know how it pumps blood everywhere, right? So if I can be copious about God's world, then the subject that I choose to write on, I can write on it with a certain type of articulation and copiousness that most people won't be able to do, right? And so when you have a better perspective of the world, then writing on your subject, you know how it all fits together. It's a symphony, right? And you play your part
Right.
really well.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I was in marching bands, for halftime shows at football games, and we travel and do marching band, but there's it's one thing to know your position on the field, when you're supposed to be where and your part, but when you get to actually see the thing as a whole and see where your part is compared to the whole, it's easier to do your part. To march your particular part. Did I get there?
And you got two more. That's you're
two more.
Not two more. So I'm going to help you out with one. Topics. How do you find the topics to write on?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, because sometimes it's just whatever I'm working on at the moment. I just put out on the Substack a reflection on Dante's use of gravity. And that's just because that's actually it's two paragraphs in a larger work that I'm working on. But as I was going through, I thought, oh, this is perfect for this spot in the book I'm working on. And I pulled it out and wrote it more specifically, because I was interested in it right there at that moment. But then other times, I'll have to write something for work. I did a history of the different vision, or a history of Lore's different vision, or statements on what mission statements, that we had. And that was because we needed that to be able to communicate to investors and different things. And so sometimes it's an assignment. I know, like, I find poetry to write when I'm reading poetry. I find essays to write when I'm reading essays. I find problems to solve when I'm having conversations with people. So just, I keep in my notes on my phone. I've got a whole series of folders. Then I just keep notes, if I'm going through. I've got my comedy bits, my fiction ideas, my music ideas, my poetry ideas, my nonfiction ideas, movie ideas, television ideas, and I just pull those up when I have something and drop it in, and then when it's time to write, I go and look through. Are any of them inspiring? Sometimes I delete them because I'm like, ooh, that made sense at the moment, but that's a terrible idea. I don't want anybody to ever think I had that idea.
So picking topics is basically whatever inspires.
Right, whatever inspires, or whatever's I'm getting paid for. That's the easiest way to pick a topic.
Now you got
so
one more.
like right now I'm working through a series of lectures on cosmology for Concordis for teacher training, right? So it's going to be training teachers on some of the broader movements, and so I'm writing a bunch on that right now for a specific audience, and it's part of my job.
So you got one more left. And this is the most important.
One.
So, while you're thinking of your last one, let me go through these real quick. So 1 is move verbs into subjects. 2, can you say it in fewer words? I can't even read my own handwriting. 3 is improve verb vocabulary so that you don't have to use adverbs. 4 is improve your noun vocabulary so you don't have to use adjectives unless you have to, and then you know that you have the right one. 6 is understanding your audience's assumptions. 7 is learn to write by imitating, which is what I'm going to be doing for this next 30 days, imitating everybody who I love their writing from. And that's how you find your voice too, right, Jason? Like that's how you find your own voice, just through imitating. Number 8, fill the well that you're drawing from, which is learn to be copious, read lots of things, even things that you probably are not necessarily interested in. And number 9 is pick topics that inspire you.
Okay. The last one is you will learn more, or you will get better by finishing something bad than by starting 100 things that are good. So finish things, write things to the end, edit them. Even if it's bad, you will learn more completing things that are bad than you will learn starting 100 good things.
And just I've talked about why I think this is important, because I think that we got to figure out how to communicate really well to this batch of people. I think we need to look at this new coalition as a batch of people that God has given us to disciple. I mean, in a little bit of a different way, because they're closer to us than they've ever been before. Like he's taken people we were just enemies at shooting, and he's put them in all of our camps. And I think that we have to figure out how to lock the doors behind them and say, you're stuck with us now. And then figure out how to preach on them. And you know what I mean? And figure out how to rhetoric on them and convince them, and not to be persnickety, but to show them why they are where they're at currently. Because there's this, they are waiting for things to get done. They're wanting things to be done. They're having this cry for real justice. And it's like, it's not the social justice cry. And I think of this, Jason, I really do think of this moment as the beginning of the end of COVID. That's how I'm looking at this. I really, that's where my head is. I'm looking at this. I'm like, COVID, people forgot how far we came. And I think we're in a 6-year window. And now this is starting a new window that I think we have, people are saying 4 years. I really think it was 2, that we need to get communicating and being winsome and being articulate and everywhere that this group of people are, young man, old man, and get in there and give them as much biblical wisdom and knowledge as possible, hoping that God takes that and turns their hearts to them and brings regeneration so that we have a better country, a better world over the next 20, 40 years, for our grandkids here. And I think we have this window right now that we're in to try and communication is at the highest level it's ever been in human history. And it's the fastest it's ever been in human history. We have to take this opportunity to communicate the beauty of truth to these people that God has given us. And so that's why I think right now this is so important, why I'm trying to get better at it, so that I can have these opportunities to reach. If I reach 10, I'm not trying to reach a bunch of people. I'm trying to reach 10. I'm trying to reach 20. I'm just trying to reach, anybody can reach that many. And if I can reach 10 and I can say, y'all go reach 10, and then God did it with 12, right? Like, yeah. Right. If that's all it takes. So maybe I should say, I'm going to follow that pattern. I want to reach 12 people. That's all. That's it. That's all I want to reach is 12 people. And I want to be able to convince them of this reality of the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ and how it affects everything in the world. And so that's been my narrative around why I want to do this. But just I'll let you wrap up all this with like kind of why writing is important, period. Because I don't want to steal your thunder about education. I'll let you talk about that.
Well, I think that the long game is in the writing and in the education, and the the kind of hot take mentality that wins the short game is not transformative because it's all reactionary.
Those are right? Good jabs. Good jabs.
Yeah, they're good jabs. But if a jab isn't setting up an uppercut, then the jab isn't useful, right? And when I used to take boxing lessons, it was always the punch. The punch that you were making was never about the punch you were making. It was all about moving the head and the body of who you were fighting into the position that you could get the knockout blow, right? That was what you're always trying to do. And we've got to think that way, even about hot takes or whatever. It's they can be fun, and reaction videos, those are all fun, but they're all reaction. We've got to start building, and you don't build without writers. You don't build without media. You don't build without schools. You don't build without educating the next generation, and you don't build without committing to get an education yourself that you don't have. So I think the reading and the writing and the returning to the great conversation is really the long game that we've got to be playing, and we've got some reprieve that if we don't use to really build some institutions, then we're not gonna get there.